Everyone loves action, so today we're going to talk about fight scenes and how to write them like a pro. Now, I used to really hate writing fight scenes. They're very difficult and kind of cumbersome, and if you don't write them well, eek, they are a pain to read. But after many, many years of polishing and practicing, I actually really love writing fight scenes and I love giving advice on how to write better fight scenes because this is one of the probably hardest things to write, and most people need a lot of help in this area. And to me, that's kind of exciting because I get to see how uh, how we make it polished and make it better. So I'm going to start actually with the number one mistake that people make when writing fight scenes. This is going to be a omniscient point of view. What happens is that writers want to capture that movie magic that you see on the screen when you get to see all parts of the battle and what's happening. And they try to capture that in the book, and they are different mediums, so it doesn't translate well. If you try to write like that in a book, it becomes very confusing. And instead of being exciting and interesting and pulling the reader in, they become their eyes glaze over and they get very bored with the scene. So you do not want to use an omniscient point of view. You don't want to try to capture what's happening over here and over there and with this character and that character. Um, as much as we really want everyone to see all aspects of what's happening in this battle that maybe we've really thought hard about, it doesn't translate well. So what you're going to do is actually the opposite. You really want to super zoom in on one POV. Whether you're writing first person or in third, you really only want to capture the main characters of that scene, the one main character of that scene, and what is happening with them, their emotions, their perception of the fight. That is going to make it interesting, and it's going to really put the reader in that position. And it's also going to help lessen the confusion of what's going on in a fight. So, one of the big things here is going to be concise wording. For concise wording, this is not the part to start adding flowery text. Save that for those scenes you really want to draw out and slow the moment down. But a fight is fast and it's happening in a matter of seconds. So if you're using flowery language, you're going to slow the scene down, but you also are going to make it confusing. You don't need to like describe every little movement in a fight because the person in the fight, your POV character, is not going to be processing every little thing that's happening. It's very quick. It's going to be confusing um, for the character, not for the reader, right? They're not getting all the data. Your character is not getting all the data, so your readers don't need all the data. You also want to avoid technical jargon. I've seen this happen a lot when reading scenes. People they do a lot of research on the martial arts that they're using or the sword techniques, and they want to show off the knowledge that they have, and so they throw out, "Oh, they did this move," and they name it. Like they give the name of the move, they give the name, like the technical name of what the characters are doing. This is going to be lost on most readers. And for the ones who do know what that technical jargon means, it's going to more pull them out of it because they're like, oh, my technical knowledge now, I'm out of the scene. You just need to loosely describe what characters are doing and not using the technical jargon. This part can be tricky when you're writing a fight scene. You want to avoid repetitive descriptions. So you don't want to say, hey, they swung a punch and he dodged. If you keep saying that someone's like punching and dodging, it's boring and it's repetitive and it slows the narrative down. You want to say something more along the lines of a volley of swings or, they danced like he danced around the hits. Make it a little more descriptive, but keep it concise without being repetitive. Fight scenes should not last a super long time. They are typically very fast. They represent fights. And even if you're writing a big battle scene, the components of each scene should be pretty quick. For example, a battle might last all day, but you don't want the reader to feel like they're reading all day. You're going to hit the highlights and then really describe the exhaustion or the muscles of wearing out. So focusing on the POV's senses, their muscles are getting tired, they're exhausted, etc. You want to hit those kind of descriptors because it's really going to add that impact of what this fight means to the character. If you're just staying there fighting and dodging, there's really no emotional impact, and that's the unique part about books versus you watch a movie, you're watching a fight scene, the actor would have to convey that they're getting tired, like the limp, that like maybe their body's heavy when they're getting up, right? But in a book, you could really get into that without, once again, keep it concise. You don't want to draw these things out, but you want to be like, hey, their muscles worked, or the legs shook when they got back up, or you want to really get into those senses. The key to a fight scene is living in the senses. You don't really want to focus, like I said, you don't want to focus on the outside. You want to focus on the POV character and what they're actually going through. If you saw my video about dialogue in a fight scene, dialogue should be minimum. And the more important the fight scene, typically the less dialogue you're going to have. So your witty character, where you might have banter with a more simple fight, if there's going to be a complicated fight, there's no time for that banter because death is on the line. You're going to be shouting quick commands, but for the most part, all of your character's energy is going into a fight. So dialogue is going to be minimal. All right, let's talk about those fatal blows. In real life, killing is typically unceremoniously fast, and that's typically going to happen in a book as well. Not every death is going to be this ceremonious long goodbye. A lot of the time, especially in a battle, they're alive one second and they're not the next. And don't be afraid to reflect that in your stories because that's the brutal reality of life. And then you can save those drawn out deaths for those scenes that really matter. Let's talk armor. As a speculative fiction writer, if you're writing sci fi or even fantasy, armor should play an important part in a lot of fights. Whether they're wearing just leather to kind of help protect and keep their mobility, or if they're wearing full on power suits, you want to keep armor in mind. Armor has existed for a reason because it helps. If you've ever worn any sort of armor, or if you've worn even like a flak vest, you'll know they're not easy to move in. They're not very comfortable. People would not be wearing armor if it wasn't helpful. So don't make your armor like melted butter. They should not be slicing through it unless they have some crazy new weapon, right? But armor should play a part. Now, keep in mind that whatever your character's wearing will affect movement as well as protection. If they're wearing something that's a lighter armor that's more like a leather, it's not going to impair their movement that much. But if they're wearing heavier armor, it's going to have an effect on how easily they move around. So kind of keep that in mind when you're writing these scenes. As for helmets, all right, some may have heard that heroes don't wear helmets. Well, if your character is going into a planned battle, they should most definitely have some sort of headgear on. Helmets are extremely important. Are they comfortable? No, but they're important. It might not look good in the movies, but that's kind of the cool part about a book. You don't have to look at it. But they should have helmet on. Protect your brain. So a fun quote from my brother that I thought was really good that I include here is that a good fight scene is a conversation with your fist. Every fight scene that you add into a story needs to be important to the narrative and to the story. Because unfortunately, a lot of fight scenes in a book is not very interesting. Go and read some of your favorite fantasy stories or even sci-fi stories. You're going to find that battles don't make up the majority of the story. People aren't particularly that invested in a fight. They're invested in the people in the fight. And so that's going to be your important thing here. When you're writing a story, only add the fight scenes as the narrative needs. So no matter how cool you think your fight scene is, if your story itself is not exciting enough, a fight scene certainly isn't going to help it. The fight scene will only harm it. Another cool thing about fighting is that you can also use this to build a character backstory, their personality, um, and even the internal conflicts that they're having. A character with a backstory who's been trained in fighting is going to fight better. They're going to have more fluid movements, they're going to be stronger, and this is going to help convey their backstory versus a your plucky brand new protagonist who doesn't have a fighting background perhaps. They should not get into a first fight and be excellent at it. Even if you have a natural talent for fighting, you are not going to last against someone who has been trained. So if you have a character who has been largely untrained in any form of fighting, their very first battle out should see them landing on their face for the most part. And this is a good way to convey backstory. So, fighting, let's say all of your characters have experience in fighting. You can still convey different backgrounds and cultures depending on fighting style. You look all over the world, and there are probably thousands of fighting styles out there. And and it's crazy how different a lot of these fighting styles are. You would think maybe that everyone would have very similar fighting styles, but they don't. And your characters can easily reflect this as well. Now, unless they studied under like the same people or maybe the same culture, have fun with the fighting style. Maybe someone has more fluid, they're very fast. You have a different character that is like strong and like more in place. A fun example is just look at like The Last Airbender, the the cartoon. They really had fun with the different fighting styles, and it really shows in the story, right? It's way more dynamic and interesting visually to see it, but it can also be in the book as well and help describe your characters. Maybe a character that's more lithe and fast, their fighting style is more about quick hits and using momentum to their advantage versus your bulky character is more stand in place and really strong. Or if you want to subvert expectations, flip it around. Have fun with it. But just like how you would make dialogue varied, you can make the fighting styles varied as well. Also, not everyone's going to use a sword. Swords actually weren't the most used weapon way back in the day. So in your fantasy story, don't be afraid to have people use halberds and pikes and axes. Like have fun with that too. You can also express a lot with character depending on their weapon. Keep it varied, keep it interesting. Another way to express personality in your characters through a fight is what is their goal of the fight? You could have two different characters in the same fight with very different goals. Maybe one wants to end this big bad guy, like they're out for blood, and the other one just wants to escape, right? They're trying to figure out they're looking for their opportunity to hightail it out of there. The way they fight is going to be, even if they have the same training and the same fight style, the way they fight in those scenes are going to be very different. And you can use that too for the same character. Your character in a fight where they are seeing red and they want to end their enemy is going to be a very different style of fighting than if they're trying to escape or if they're trying to protect somebody. So keep that in mind in your fighting as well. What is the goal of the characters in this fight? Is someone going to make a rash decision because they are seeing red? Or is someone going to be more protective, someone going to try to escape? Have fun with it, but make their goals varied. Another good part of showing character experience is how do they react to a fight? Are they like really clear headed because this is just another day? Or are they really confused and suffering from that fog of war? So, the fog of war is all the chaos around you makes it hard for you to comprehend what's happening. And you're just kind of acting on impulse. So the way that your character reacts can show experience, but it can also show the level of complexity of what's happening. Maybe they start with a clear head. They're like, yes, we know what's happening. Then a curveball happens. There's an explosion, a dragon, a big old mech pops up. And suddenly now things are confusing. Dust is kicked up. Maybe they get separated from their friends during an explosion, right? So then you go from that clarity of mind to a more fog of war. And what that does is it changes the dynamic of the fight, keeping it more interesting. And it also amps up the tension. Whereas before, this character, they had it, they were going to win. Now it's not so sure. Now everything's been upended. So do think about the choreography of your fight to make it a little more interesting and to build tension as well. So here's some other good tips for writing out action for plan, especially in the planning stage of it. Act it out. So one fun thing that if you ever watch like behind the scene with animators, they're out there acting things out as they're drawing them. And as a writer, you can easily do this too. Be like, hey, would this make sense? If I swung this way, what would happen? Right? Just loosely act out the actions of the battle. It can give you a good idea of what's working and what's not. Oh, I almost forgot this really important thing. This is a fairly common mistake I see. Not understanding how physics works. If someone hits you in the chin, you're going to go back. You're not going to fall forward. This is one I've seen. And I've seen a lot of simple mistakes like that. and acting it out can also help you avoid your physics mistakes. All right. And if you're writing a scene that is more of a duel, your final draft will be that one POV character. But if you're having a hard time kind of thinking about how the fight's going to go, write the scene from both points of view. You can either do this at the same time in like the same scene, or first write it from one person's point of view and then write it from their opponent's point of view and see how they differ and how that would change the scene up, and then write a new version, kind of combining those two. Sometimes you have to get into the opponent's head to understand exactly how the scene's going to play out. All right, last but certainly not least, wounds. Probably next to the omniscient POV telling of a battle, this is the next biggest issue I see, is not understanding medical science. And there are some great groups out there for like just writers on like Facebook for medical traumas, but do your research on wounds and how they affect the body and how quickly you could die from something. Now, granted, there's going to be a bit of suspension of disbelief. You see this in movies, it's going to be in books, but you don't want it to be so suspended that someone who is knowledgeable, at least a little bit, would be like, I'm gonna Google that real quick. So make sure you do your Googling first. Some of the big ones that I see, if your character is coughing blood, they are about to die. Like they are gone. Even with like our more advanced medical sciences, that is a bad place to be in. Your character's not going to just be recovering from that. If you really just want the aesthetic of them spitting out blood, make them like bite their cheek or get a tooth knocked out or something. But if your character starts coughing blood, they're about done. They're like done. All right, other little bonus tip, do not start your book with a fight scene. Like I said before, readers don't really care about the fight scenes. They care about the characters in the fight scene. So if your reader doesn't know the characters and you start the book with a fight scene, they don't care. And this is a very common way that people start a book because you hear the advice, start with something exciting. You're like, what's more exciting than a fight? Turns out in a book, a lot of things. So don't start with fight. Your readers are not invested in those people. Keep all the advice in mind because when a fight scene is done really well in a book and the book has led up to this moment, it is very satisfying. You can really get your adrenaline going, get the feels going. So don't be afraid of fight scenes. Practice them, get your feedback, get more eyes on them, but also don't overuse them. Whatever you do, do as if you're doing it for the Lord. So strive for that excellence in your stories. Any specific questions about writing fight scenes, leave it in the comments and I will do my best to get back to you. Thanks. Bye.